And with that, I'll give the official welcome to our webinar on growing culturally welcoming and validating programs. This is the second of a three-part series on this topic, and the subtopic for today's session is assessing the climate and the soil. We're glad that you can all join us today, and we look forward to our conversation with you. So, as I was saying, I'm the host of the session, Eric Steve Otter. I think I corresponded with all of you over email and maybe talked with you on the phone as well. Our LEARNS project is the Corporation for National and Community Services training and technical assistance provider for youth serving. I am a former representative of the corporation. I started my career as a VISTA volunteer and then worked as a recruiter for the corporation for a little bit before going off and doing some training and education consulting. And I returned to the Pacific Northwest in 2006 to join the LEARNS team, where I help design and deliver online and face-to-face trainings. I'll be the WebEx host for this session, so I'll be one to coach us through some of the interactive activities we've got lined up. And our main presenter we're pleased to have with us is Jin Lin Wu. So Jin, would you like to give a brief introduction?
Yes, thank you. Welcome everyone. Good morning on the West Coast and good afternoon on the East Coast. I'm talking to you from Seattle from my bedroom, which probably has the better sound. And just a little bit of introduction. I'm celebrating my 40th year in affiliation with the VISTA program, served 40 years ago in Brooklyn, New York. Can you put on speaker for me? My training and background is in education, and beginning in the 70s, I already had a deep interest in multicultural education, so that's carried me through, and lots of different subjects, including a number of jobs. Let me know if you want to.
Hey, Jen, sorry, can you hold on just a second?
Sure.
I think we need to put the phone on mute.
Presentation mode is now enabled.
Hi, this is Eric again. Sorry about that, folks, but we're getting a little bit of background noise. So for now and at different points throughout the session, just to make sure we all have a good listening experience, we'll be muting the phone. So sorry, go ahead, Jen.
Okay, so just the last couple of things is that I've worked in a number of youth-serving, community-serving projects with lots of different cultural diversity. So migrant families, immigrant families, Native American tribal communities, lots of limited English proficient young people and families, and even urban street gang involved youth. So I'm really excited to be with you today. I scanned the list of folks and recognized a whole lot of old friends and also a lot of colleagues from work in national service. So welcome, welcome.
Great, thank you, Jen. We'd just like to briefly cover some tools and housekeeping items, and then we'll set Jen loose. As you just noticed or experienced, we'll be keeping the phones on mute for sections of the presentation just so that Jen doesn't have any background noise competing with her. But we do hope that you'll share ideas and comments with us, and we'll be sure to unmute the phones at various points and invite you to share that feedback. We'd also like to share with you a couple of other ways you can offer feedback or ask questions using a couple of the tools in WebEx. One of which is the raise hand icon. I'm pointing to it on our presentation slide right now, but you'll actually see it somewhere over here underneath the participants list. It's a little button that looks like a hand. So why don't we practice with that real quick? How about those of you that participated in our first webinar on September 10th, if you could raise your hand. So if you were with us on September 10th for the first webinar in our series, please raise your hand. Good, thank you. So I see Heather's back for a repeat performance. Tasha, Carissa. Great, and for those of you that didn't make it, that's fine. We're not calling you out. As I mentioned, we've recorded the previous session, so you can always go back and watch that. We just would like to get a sense for how many in our audience are returning. Okay, so if you just raised your hand, if you could click that button again to lower your hand. And how about for the folks, this is your first webinar of the series with us. So this is the first of the 3 webinars that you're joining us for. Great. So I'm seeing more hands go up. Okay. So for all of you that just raised your hands, if you could click that button again to lower them. And that's one way in which we will invite you to let us know that you have a question or comment you'd like to share. The other way is you can always send a chat. So on the presentations slide, it looks like this, and it's going to be somewhere over here to the right on your screen. So you can send a chat to me as the host, to host and presenter, if you'd like something to go to both Jen and myself, or you can send it to everyone if you think it's something that should be to your colleagues or everyone, and other people on the line. So some of these panels may collapse throughout the presentation, but you'll see little down arrows. I'm pointing to one right now on the slide, and that will allow you to open and close your chat and participants panel. So there's also a set of annotation tools, and I'm going to draw a little line across the top of the screen. They're going to appear at the top of your WebEx window as well. And these annotation tools are a series of buttons that look like, well, as are described on the slide here, a pointer, a text tool, and some of the drawing tools that you might find in Microsoft Word or Excel. So in just a second, we'll have you practice with one of these annotation tools, and we'll be using a couple of the other ones later on in the presentation. But let me just quickly note that after this session, we'll be sending you to an online anonymous evaluation of the session. We invite you and encourage you to take just a couple of minutes to complete that for us. We have one more webinar in this particular series, but we at the LEARNS Project are also planning on doing a whole host of webinars next year and beyond, and we always want to make sure that they're meeting your needs and the needs of your colleagues. So please do complete that survey when it appears on your screen. Afterwards, we'll also send it out as a link in an email following the session. But let us play a little bit. So I'm going to pull up a slide which has a map of the United States. It's on slide 4. And what I'd like you to do is to click the first annotation tool, which is the pointer tool, which looks like an arrow pointing to the right. It's the very first button on your annotation tools. I'd like you to click that and then just click on the slide where you are calling in from. Good. Great. Good. Looks like we have a good representation of East Coasters, as well as the Pacific Northwest. Anyone in the Midwest? Oh yeah, some in Wisconsin and Illinois, looks like. Great. Okay, thanks everyone for doing that. If you're having a little bit of difficulty figuring out how to use the tools, we'll, as I was mentioning, also have opportunities where we'll unmute the phones and you can just ask your question or offer feedback that way. But I think without any further ado, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Jen.
Thanks, Eric. The slide that's up showing now really will help us sort of provide an overview to the series. When I was asked to step up to help facilitate this series, I couldn't think of any other word but to grow it. You know, when you think about facilitating culturally welcoming and validating programs, I think, you know, probably everyone on the call has cared about it long before this call. And what we all know is that it's not something that goes on a list, a checklist, and you just go through it one time and then we're done. I mean, our communities are constantly evolving, our identities, our cultural memberships, things are always in flux and changing, and if we care about that, we know that it has to be a committed process, that it's something we do ongoing, and it goes in fits and starts. Sometimes we make great headway, and other times, you know, we move forward and then we have some setbacks. So what we thought about it was that it was growing and that we wanted to stretch the conversation over at least 3 opportunities. So 2 weeks ago, we took up the conversation of laying the foundation, and that was really about answering the question, why? Why care so much to do this? Why is it important to do? Today's conversation is about assessing the climate and soil, and for me, that's much more about asking the question, with what? Like, where are we beginning, and do I have a good pulse on where we're starting and what's going on? Next week, we have the opportunity to look at, when we work with staff and volunteers, what might that work look like if we are to engage them and build a team that is all about providing our families and youth and adults culturally welcoming and validating programs. So we're really happy to have you here today, and we're glad for the opportunity to discuss the idea of assessing the climate and soil. Thanks, Eric. For today, we have specific goals. We crafted 3, and we believe that you probably have other expectations as well, and in a moment we'll invite you to add to the list. But at the top of it, we want to just strengthen our awareness about the importance of gathering accurate feedback. The other one is to share with you some strategies around how do you facilitate organizational awareness about where you are. So we're going to look at a cultural audit tool, and we're going to practice that a little bit and just open it up so that other people who have had experiences with audits can share with us that strategy and how they benefited from using it. There's also a whole other battery of assessments that are more what we call self-awareness assessments that are really useful for teams of people to use to facilitate dialogue, awareness, to build plans off of. So basically we want to be really concrete this session and showcase a couple of strategies and resources and some web links that all around how do you get a good picture of where you're starting. Any other expectations or goals? And as we learn the webinar structure together, Eric, we're asking folks to enter it on the chat, or they can raise their hands and just unmute. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, they can. I'm going to unmute everyone in just a second, but you can also, if you feel comfortable doing it, you can also type it in as a chat message, or you can also raise your hand as we practiced earlier.
Presentation mode is now disabled.
Other goals or other needs people would like to see us discuss in our time together?
Okay, we also have built-in time at the end for question and answer, so if and many opportunities along the way to input or to raise a question.
Okay, I do see that looks like Julie might have a question, or maybe you were just playing with annotation tools. They are fun. Did you have a question or comment, Julie?
No, I did. Sorry.
Okay, no, not a problem. Anyone else? Okay, hearing and seeing none, I think we'll go back to presentation mode, and please go ahead, Jen.
Okay.
Presentation mode is now enabled.
There we go. So those of you that have been in my workshops, I always talk about chunking up a process. So this conversation breaks down into 3 major chunks. So one is around my lens, my perception, and we'll have a conversation about that and why that's important to own, to get our hands around, our heads around. And then we'll spend some time talking about the importance of creating a cultural profile of the community. And the third chunk for this webinar is the whole idea of assessing the culture and the climate, getting just a good read on what's going on and using some tools and community feedback to help us do that. So those are sort of the 3 major conversations of this webinar. The first one, the whole idea of my lens, my perception. I think we wanted to begin with a gentle reminder that as broad and inclusive as your view on the world is, and you can have incredible intention to make your program culturally validating and welcoming, what we know is it's still not broad enough. It's our lens. It filters through our world, our experience, and we do have a take on what's going on, but if we're only using our sensors, that's basically more narrow than it needs to be. So we wanted to just sort of punctuate the fact, and I'm going to share with you 2 examples from my life that get to this point about my lens, my perception. I went to I think a pretty fantastic elementary school, and my first home was, Seattle's Chinatown, female. For what I could guess, I was from Christian home and heterosexual, and just a lot of different things around my identity. In first grade, I had a wonderful, welcoming school teacher, and our class was very multi-ethnic and really diverse. And you couldn't have found a warmer person in Ms. Nichols. I mean, so in terms of the welcoming, and even in terms of cultural welcoming, she tried to extend a welcome and create a space for each one of us. But I can tell you that as lovely and loving as she was, there was a whole lot about my identity that I never felt validated, and even in simple ways. And when we talk about cultural membership and awareness and inclusion, we include ethnic diversity, but not just ethnic diversity. And I remember every so often she loved to have us write and talk about what we did on summer break, what we did on the weekend, and there was a definite economic difference in our classroom, and I remember dreading the conversations around what we did for vacation. A lot of folks went on these, what I'd call vacation, and I remember even in the first grade working and needing to work and just working on projects with my mom and dad and doing chores and all these other things. And I don't think she ever intended to make me feel less than or not normal. But many of the activities that she planned in a very loving, welcoming way just missed the mark in terms of validating who I was. And so, we have lots of different experiences, and I'm sure that it's triggering experiences for you as well, where you can be in the presence of the most loving, welcoming people. But the truth is that you get the warmth, but you don't really get the validation. And what we're trying to do with this series is to have us look at that and think through our programming to look at the question, who really is welcome and validated, included in the programs that we are offering our communities and our youth and children. So just wanted to start with the whole conversation about how you can be of great intention, but the impact still can be that we're leaving out and not including and contributing to the invalidation of some of our communities and young people. Any comments about that? Just the whole idea of my lens, my perception. Okay. Well,
I was just going to say, I'm going to open up the phones if anyone wants to share anything.
Presentation mode is now disabled.
So if Jin's experience maybe made you think of something from your own experience that you might like to share, feel free to type something in the chat panel or just offer it up on the phone.
Hard to know, like, how long to wait and, in this kind of an environment.
Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and keep moving. And, if at a later time you'd like to mention something that you've gained through experience or that you remember from another time of your life, please do share that with us. So I'll put you back in presentation mode, Jin.
Thank you.
Presentation mode is now enabled.
So the reason why we're focusing on assessing and gathering feedback is that if we're committed to building inclusion, really feedback is essential. We need to own the fact that our lens is limited, and oftentimes with the best intention, our impact with communities we're trying to reach can be less than respectful, not as inclusive, not as culturally appropriate as we would hope. So what we're encouraging you and to do is to continue gathering feedback in different ways so that the community can give you a sense of how it's going for them. Just another quick example, when I was in law school, I was taught by a really progressive, radical criminal attorney who helped prosecute the Chicago 7, and really dynamic person. And he, very progressive in politics, and the school actively involved and recruited students of color, and I just thought it would be a great place to go. I remember sitting in his class, and he had really no awareness that he barely ever called the female students in the class. I mean, here's a guy who really deeply cared about communities and about change and about access, and just didn't know that because of the way he was trained and how he lived in the world, he just missed over the female students in the class. And it wasn't until we decided to just count his behavior and give him feedback did he even believe us, because he just said, that's not who I am. I care that all my students get educated. But his awareness, his filter, his experience just didn't have him looking at that. And, he really appreciated the fact that we had done this little study. But all of us need to be open to people giving us information that may be hard to hear, but would allow us to actually meet our goals of more inclusion, more cultural respect, just a much more thoughtful engagement of different communities. So we want to just make sure that you don't leave this webinar, without thinking as you return to your programs. So if feedback is essential, how am I gathering that? How am I continually building a process where communities I care about and want to serve are letting us know how it's working for them? I think that's, and the tools that we picked then are tools that will allow us to look at the whole issue of how is it going.
Hey, Jen?
Yes.
I don't know if you saw it in your panel, but I see that Kathleen Rice offered something to share.
Oh, great.
So I'm going to take it out of presentation mode.
Presentation mode is now disabled.
And I think I know that that voice is a little annoying, so I think I'll try to avoid using that unless we need to. So sorry for that, turning it on and off. But Kathleen, would you like to share?
Sure. Hi, Jen and everybody.
Hi.
I was going to share an example of where my own lenses were really limited, and I really appreciate, Jen, the way you've kind of opened up this session. It was a time when I was involved in a service relationship. I had students involved in a service learning class, and I was also involved at the same Family Resource Center, and I was working one-on-one with a woman who's become a dear friend who had an advanced stage of MS, and she used a wheelchair, and she wasn't able to write at that point, and has had a lot of challenges she was dealing with, and she had asked me to help her fill out some forms, and she said, well, I think you should make a copy of that form because it's the only one I have, and if you make a mistake, it's going to take me a while to get another form. And I said, thinking I knew better, oh, no, it'll be fine. It's really simple form. There's only a few things here. And as we filled out the form, I did make a mistake. And I started to white it out, and then it just made it worse. And then she said to me, people don't think I have good ideas, but sometimes I have good ideas. And it was just a heartbreaking experience for me to see how, again, like you said, kind of my best of intentions, thinking I was being helpful, but then seeing like underneath my best intentions there was, I think, like some arrogance or something that just made me think I knew better than she knew for herself. But luckily I did hear her feedback, and it was life-changing, and I've never forgotten that, and I've tried to really pay more attention to not replicate that same kind of situation.
Thank you, Kathleen. It's also great to hear your voice. I noticed a number of old friends are on this call.
It's the Jim and Lou fan club, probably.
Anyone else? Yeah, I just think that it takes courage to be open to feedback and to listen, especially because the work is difficult, and sometimes we get discouraged and we close up, and we're determined and we fight. But if we're to do it well, You know, we really need to pull back and trust the community and trust that we can work it, you know, with information, we can work together to make it better. I mean, I think that, you know, just it takes time to gather feedback. It takes courage to gather feedback, and sometimes we don't know what to do with it, and we're on our treadmill going in one direction, and it makes us stop and have to rethink some things, but it's really important to do. Eric, I think we can go on, and we'll just, you know, if anyone has something to say, we want to leave it an open process. We created a structure, but we're still experimenting with this webinar format. So we wanted to get practical.
Please report to the guidance office.
So folks, I think we'll try to leave the lines open if we can, but what you might need to do, and if you could please maybe mute your own phone by pressing mute or mic. You can also press *6 on your phone, and that will mute your phone as well. And then just remember to press *6 again or mute again to open up your phone. Okay. Sorry, Jen. Go ahead.
Sure. So what we know as learners is that you always like some concrete strategies, and we are committed to sharing at least 2 practical strategies. One is about creating a cultural profile of the community, and some of you that are also involved with AmeriCorps Vista work, you'll recognize this because it's that I wrote for that curriculum. But just thinking about where do we start? I think that one way to do it is to work as a team to create a profile of the community, a cultural profile, and usually it's a pretty daunting list. I mean, as you begin to break down all the different cultural groups in the community, the list becomes quite long, and then the staff or the team of volunteers are overwhelmed. So I think to think about it.
Sorry, Jen. Going back to the presentation.
Presentation mode is now enabled.
In a 2-step process, you know, just some simple strategies to facilitate dialogue. So my recommendation is that you sit with your team of, you know, parents, staff, volunteers, and start talking about let's tag, you know, let's create a cultural profile of our community and list them out. And maybe it would be useful in our planning to list them out in 2 columns. One, essentially, in our participant pool, in our youth population, in the people that we serve, what are the cultural groups that are represented? And we really need to get on this right away. They become a priority list because we're serving those people directly. I still believe it's important to really reach out and engage and honor all the cultures of the community. So on Group B, the B list, I'm suggesting that you put on that list still different cultural groups in the community. They may not be in your population or your target audience, but they're still a part of the community. And that's a secondary list of cultural groups that we need to build our awareness about. So I think that would be a good, you know, a good way to approach it in a simple way, and we'll give you a better indication of what it looks like. So Eric, will you help me bring up the list? So here's just a simple table. It is an effort to put together a cultural profile. We created just a fictitious sample for you to give you a sense of what might show up, you know, in a profile of a particular community for a particular program. So in Group A, we have the cultural groups that are represented by the families that we're serving. And in Group B, these are significant communities within our community. They're not directly represented right currently in our student population or youth population or target population, but they're still members of our community. And as we build awareness, so it's sort of scaffolding, it's sort of creating a plan that is then more approachable rather than a huge long laundry list that never allows you to, you know, it just overwhelms you. I'm suggesting that you measure it out and you have dialogue with your team about which groups are in which columns and where do we start. And this would be the basis then for good dialogue and planning. we're going to do a little just sort of dry run with you on it, and I'll talk a little bit more about how it could be used. What's hard for me to do is talk, and then I'm trying to also read. Or, Eric, maybe if you can watch the questions come in, you can just remind me as we're going.
Yeah, and I see that we have one from Julie, and it's a good one on some examples of how mentoring programs can get feedback from the community, their mentees and mentors, other than using tools other than surveys, interviews, and focus groups. And as Julie indicated, that might be a question we might be able to answer a little bit later in the presentation.
And the audit might work too. Okay. So
we see
looking at creating a cultural profile of the community, here's a sample sheet, and then Eric's going to bring up a whiteboard for us, I think. Okay, here's a whiteboard. So what we thought might be interesting is if we play with this a little bit, and if you reflect on your own program and the cultural communities that are represented in your target population, if a couple of you wouldn't mind putting on the whiteboard some of the communities that fall under Group A for you, and also some of the communities that aren't necessarily in your program population, but definitely are in your community, it'll better illustrate like how it works. So we have some takers out there who'd be willing to write up under. So Eric, do they use the T for the?
Yeah, if you could use the text tool, which is one of your annotation tool buttons. It's the second one that looks like the letter T. Just click on that, and then you can type something into either Group A or Group B, and then just click somewhere else on the screen, and it will display your contribution. Great. So we have some coming in now. In Group A, we have special needs youth, English language learners, also youth and adults with disabilities. So again, those annotation tools are at the top of your screen. Foster care involvement, okay, another Group A contribution. Okay, someone just typed into Group B, children of incarcerated parents, single parent families in column A. Okay.
Great.
So at-risk students as a Group A group. Someone contributed Somali Bantu refugee families in Group A. Great.
Yes. You know, right now we're doing it as a collective exercise and process. When I do it with teams, I usually have everybody do a first cut by themselves individually, just if we were asking them to do a cultural profile. And then as a group we share it, because what I find is that on a team we have different perceptions of who's represented in our target population, and usually we have different connection and awareness of what's going on, and it makes for rich conversation about who's actually, you know, in our group. The reason why I recommend that you engage in this kind of an activity is, in general, in our programming, because we're stretched thinly, is that lots of times what we pay attention to is the majority, and we pay attention to the most visible cultural groups. And then there are a lot of people in our midst who are not getting much validation at all, and they're, they exit our programs not any stronger culturally than when they came into the program. And so we're suggesting some intentional processes where your team sits down and talks about it and discusses it and builds their awareness about it. So for some people, you know, they're still thinking that a lot of people don't have a culture. And I think that this simple process can allow for a lot of awareness building by the team. So it's not just tagging who lives in our community, but it's building people's awareness about what culture is and the different cultural experiences that are significant to our identities and to our membership. So I just really suggest that if you don't do this, you do something so that there's a collective understanding of who are our cultural communities in this population. Any comments about that or any other suggestions? Or does anyone approach sort of the same conversation in a little slightly different way that you'd like to offer up?
Yeah, and I think if you could use the raise hand button like we used earlier, or maybe type something into chat. We're still picking up some background noise, so I think if we can use those two tools for a bit, that might help us.
Any questions about the profile? I think I'd like to add that, you know, besides doing the activity, then once we've reached some consensus about who sits in Group A and Group B, I think that you can use this then to prioritize awareness building activities, the bringing in of different leadership from the community to help inform you. But it would form the basis of some good planning for capacity building and awareness building is if you surveyed your team and asked, given that these are our major communities, on a 3-point scale, what are people's level of experience and awareness about these communities? And you can start to grow some data that allows you to do some good training planning or event planning or community engagement planning.
Great, and I just mentioned, Jen, that and National Service folks might be aware of this, but the Resource Center, whose URL we'll provide later in the presentation, also has a good collection of materials on community mapping and this type of profiling.
So that's like the first kind of tool we wanted to just sort of share with you, and maybe it's a relearning or reminding. We're going to move on to our third conversation around assessing the culture and the climate. You know, just getting a good pulse on what's going on in terms of validation, cultural validation, and a sense of welcome, a sense of respect that we extend to the different cultural communities. So Eric, we can, I think, go on to the next slide. I know that many of us have been involved in different kinds of organizational assessments. The two that we mentioned that we were going to showcase is one around cultural audit, and then a closer look at many of the surveys that, you know, all of us have participated in to facilitate reflection on our part about where we sit with awareness about different groups. So we're going to look at that, and with our time, what we think will happen is we'll have a chance to look at the cultural audit in more depth and then showcase a couple of the surveys and a couple of websites that relate to awareness surveys. And they're a little bit more sort of self-evident, and you can see how they would work. So for some of you know that I worked for a time with the CHP project to oversee the diversity training for the Corporation for National Community Service. And in that time, we coached a number of organizations who were really committed to working on their cultural appropriateness, cultural competency, and our colleague, Jim Hickman, he put together the work for our team on the cultural audit observation worksheet, he with Dave Nakashima, and we wanted to share samples. If you Googled cultural audits, you would get a number of organizations across the country and across the world now that are doing work in this area. We wanted to simply share this sample, and what I can tell you is in practice, what you need to do is sit with your team, look at a number of the samples, and craft something that seems really appropriate for the culture of your organization, the way you language things, the way you value things, and shape your own worksheet. I wouldn't suggest you just take someone's worksheet and just use it. I would suggest that you adapt. But this is what a typical cultural audit observation worksheet is, and just to offer up a definition of a cultural audit and what we're talking about. And I think a number of you have already experienced what a cultural audit is, so you'll help me. So a definition that I have here is that a cultural audit is a systematic assessment of an organization to understand the experience members of different cultural groups are having. The audit's usually a part of a process intended to provide the organization feedback and to help you build culturally inclusive systems and activities and programming. So like in a financial audit where you would want to know how healthy you are financially, a cultural audit would allow you to understand better how you're doing in terms of meeting and respecting the cultures in your community. So usually a team is trained, you get training, you decide on an instrument, you usually adapt from different instruments, and you create a tool that will guide you through a walkthrough that will allow you to pick up information about a group. But you'll notice that on this one, the top page isn't the audit itself, but just sort of grabbing information about the audit. In general, once you have that A list, you would, in your training of your team, coach them to really think about it. So if we have a new immigrant Bosnian community and we're wondering, how welcome and how well do we integrate culture in what we do, the team would decide. And so you'll notice this box here, you would put in there then pay special attention to persons needing to use wheelchairs, people, community members of the Bosnian community. So you would decide as a team which ones are you wanting to pay special attention to. So this is the first page, and then Eric, can you show me the next page? Here we go. So there are usually about a dozen or so questions that the team's decided that they want to look on, but it really is all designed to have a team come through and review a program on multiple levels. And you'll notice that on this one we have, so visually, what are the messages being sent? What are, through listening, what do I pick up in terms of who's welcome here, who's comfortable, who do we honor, who do we respect, who do we recognize? And if I were from a different community, what might I think about that? And would I feel a sense of welcome if that was the intent? So usually there's about a dozen questions, and you'll receive a packet with all of the handouts that are a bunch of samples for you to review. But we thought with the time, for some of you, you've actually experienced a cultural or some type of audit, you've been on an audit team, and they are undertaken for various reasons. We thought that we'd like to hear from you and see how many of you have actually participated in a sort of a walkthrough of an organization to help provide feedback. And if you would share with us if you've done that, as well as for what purpose. There are multiple purposes. We're promoting those audits that relate to culture, but you might have some other ones that you want to share. Eric, are we asking folks to do the chat?
Yeah, if you have participated in some sort of organizational audit, and it doesn't have to be this particular type of audit, if you could maybe type that into the chat panel and send it to all participants so we can see what's out there. And I should also point out while people are typing or thinking that these handouts, which you will receive after the session, as Jen mentioned, you can also use a scroll bar that should appear in your WebEx window to see what else is in the document, or scroll down to the part of the document you're not able to see on the screen right now. Okay. Let's see. Well, actually, my colleague, typing from another computer I have logged in, described a program-wide curriculum review for an ESL project. Mm-hmm. They also typed in a communication audit, and that's the idea of assessing how people communicate with each other in the organization or not, and opportunities and challenges that those communication channels or blockages of the channels create. So it looks like Patty wrote in a written cultural competency audit required by a county funder. Good. From Kathy, she says, I have participated in an audit on volunteer programs. Okay, good.
What I can tell you is once you've been on an audit team, I mean, the logic of it and the process of it is pretty intuitive. I mean, it's not that hard, and you can gather an incredible amount of good information to help with program improvement. I know that in the 70s, there were lots of schools that opened themselves to climate assessments. So that it's very similar to that, where teams of community members and staff joined together, learned a process, decided on some process, and then would visit a school site or a program site and just simply take in everything. Just sort of imagine that I was, you know, limited English proficient. Imagine that I was from a community who's a recent immigrant community, just taking on just different cultural experiences and trying to imagine how would I feel if I were in this space. We're going to actually include in this webinar just a little bit. Do we have time, Eric, to move to trying our library example?
Oh, yeah, I think we can do that. I did want to mention that actually I think I've been mispronouncing her name as, or his or her name as Julie, so I apologize if I have that wrong, but it looks like it might be Jui. Anyway, they provided the comment that they participated in an audit for behavior of international volunteers in a developing country.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of good examples, and it sounds like we have some good experience of this type of process among the people that are with us today. Okay.
As you consider and focus on creating culturally validating and welcoming programs, you know, the audit would allow you to get some feedback. And sometimes it's an in-house thing where it's just the project team that does it and just comes in with a different lens on it. Often it's involving as diverse of a team as possible so that you can get a lot of different kind of feedback. But even if we together imagined our local community library, in fact, I'd like you to do that right now. Is just think about your local community library, and if we were to walk through and spend a couple hours at the local community library, you know, every space is designed to embrace, to reach out, to welcome a group of people. And then usually it also has its limitations about who it's actually welcoming and validating. So we thought everybody, or most people, would have had at least an experience with a public library. So let's try to imagine that and bring that into view. And we've actually pulled a couple of questions from Jim's sample and have you just focus on that. So Eric, can you bring up the, here you go. So if we were on an audit team and we were going to look at the local public library, even though we don't share one, I think a lot of them are very similar. I want you to think about the sounds that you notice. You know, all the different sounds that you're hearing at your public library. And in a typical audit, what you would be asked to do first is just to write, just describe all the sounds that you hear, and not interpret yet, but just tag all the sounds that you hear. So it's a whiteboard there, so help us here with our example. What are some of the things that you hear? So we have somebody offering people speaking in whispers and hard for people with hearing problems. Okay, there's non-English speaking. So you hear languages other than English spoken at the library. Anything else that you hear? Someone's already seen our second question, too, around the physical design and layout, that the tables are too close together. So as you take in information and simply are descriptive, and the iPods that are much too loud. Because we're on a mission to figure out which communities are welcomed through what we have and which ones are validated, after you've put down all the data, then we would ask the team to start interpreting and thinking about, so who is welcome here? I mean, well, this space meets well with whose needs, and whose needs does it not meet well with? Okay, and we're starting to get right there, books on tall shelves, hard for people in wheelchairs. The reference librarian only speaks English. So we were starting to develop a composite with a team of people who are lending their lenses to us to get a full picture of what's really going on. And as we re-look and look through different eyes, we get a better understanding of how people might be experiencing what we've designed for them. So apart from intention, there's the impact, and we're asking you to gather data about, how people experience your program. Does that make sense? So you would interpret and reflect on all these different things that people are bringing up. Any comments about that? So in terms of a cultural audit, the sample that you'll receive in the packet, there are 12 questions. There could be many more. You just have to read through and decide, think about it. You could even, again, I said Google, and you would get many more samples. And then we have a number of web links for you to look at some and get other ideas. But part of the group process is to put together the audit instrument, and then reach some agreements about how you're going to use it together, and then do some practicing. But this is very similar to what might happen in a cultural audit. And remember, if we had tagged certain experiences, cultural experiences for, say we were really interested for how our program reached the needs of limited English proficient families, we would assign a couple people to especially pay attention to that. Any questions? Any comments? Anyone have used a cultural audit and it informed how you organized or planned the next level of your programming?
Well, Jen, I think since we're kind of heading towards the end of the presentation anyway, I'll go ahead and open up the phone line so folks can answer your question or offer up other ideas or experiences. One thing I'm noticing is a lot of people are sensitive to the fact that the layout of the library might not make people with disabilities or specifically people in wheelchairs comfortable. Okay, I'll take the phone out of presentation mode now.
Presentation mode is now disabled.
It also looks like it's a little bit challenging to think about groups in different jobs or leadership positions. Anyone have thoughts on that?
Eric, were you able to put that question up?
Yeah, I think people should be able to see it on their screen, but if not, you can use the scroll bar in your WebEx window to scroll down, and that should give you a little bit more space to type in responses.
Oh, okay. On mine, my scroll bar froze. I couldn't move it down.
Okay.
Okay, so our third question, we took 3 from Jim's sample, and one then was about staffing and significant positions in the organization and what that looked like and what messages that might send to our communities. Okay, there's some more around the physical layout, but it's taking a set of questions, allowing a team to walk through and to look at it through various filters, grab as much information as possible, and then sit with it. I think a lot of times we're involved in the day-to-day, and we care about these things, but they just don't get on the radar. We're on a mission, and we do what we do, and every so often we're suggesting that you take the time to gather feedback, engage the community in giving you feedback, doing a 360 of your organization or your program with the help of community members to look at it. Did Joan have your hand up?
Oh.
Oops, okay.
Okay. Well, I see Kathleen's pointer is on the screen. Did you have a question or comment, Kathleen? No, maybe just playing with the annotation tools.
Okay.
Yep, sorry, I just can't get it off.
Okay, no problem.
Jim, this is Amy Kanata in Portland, and I actually have a question about the team, the audit team.
Yes.
Are there certain people that you want on the team? I mean, who ideally should be part of the audit team, and should there be a makeup that's representative of your community, or would you use your staff members? How would that be set up?
When we've done I find that the best is the most diverse team you can get with definite representation across the community. Sometimes that's not possible, and sometimes we start out even with an internal team. It has a lot to do with, I mean, a lot of things factor into who goes on to the team, but you want to work your way to the place where different community members and staff, a cross-section, would step forward to help you with this important work. And what you'll find is people learn so much when they're on the audit team. They become more sensitive and aware, and as they do it, they just pick up so much more, and they start being better advocates for issues that weren't on their list to begin with. So it may be that a person on a team never really thought a lot about the physical layout and how that might be a barrier to participation by persons with different disabilities. But as they learn and join with other people and looking at that, they're just that much more attuned after they finish the audit to think about, boy, we have this meeting space and these tables can't be this close, or we can't use that meeting space, even though it's free. There's no way for certain members of our community to even access that space. So, so Amy, it can be a lot of different ways how it breaks out, but if you could build it to the place where it's a broad cross-section, it's representative, it's a better team, because they can not only teach while they're doing the audit, they can inform. If you have a very homogeneous group, you'll still be able to do the audit. It just won't provide as many opportunities for people to help build each other's awareness.
And I would imagine, Jen, this is Nikki, and I'm thinking back to the question earlier about creative ways to elicit feedback in, say, a mentoring program. It might be also a good idea to invite mentees and volunteers and young people to be part of that audit team. Is that something that you have any experience with or that you would recommend?
Yep, I've had lots of cross-age, and what's great in the team process is that for some community members who don't feel as comfortable doing the writing, they're worried about the spelling and things, when you do a team approach, you can spread the responsibilities across a group of people, and it allows also for some really strong relationship building. They're all helpers to your program. So it lends itself unlike a survey where usually it's one-on-one, although focus groups, don't require a lot of necessarily a relationship to print or reading. The audit is real active. It can be a friendly process and usually build community engagement because it's also interesting. Any other questions? I'm noticing the time. The other realm that we wanted to talk about was surveys. And when the packet you'll receive, and I think I know a whole lot of you have been involved in diversity trainings and different cultural awareness trainings, cultural competency trainings, but we pulled two examples that were in the public domain and that people could look at. And the American Speech Language Hearing Association has created a simple tool that I could imagine being used by a team of people. And in that process, individuals are asked to reflect on where they are with their attitudes or their knowledge or awareness of different things. So an example might be, oh, you have it up here, great. So here Eric has inputted their instrument, and simply you would self-rate. And Eric, I'm not able to scroll, so what I'm seeing is a frozen screen.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and and this will be another handout that we'll send out after our session. But I adapted the personal reflection that you had sent and just put it into a Word document. But it has, for example, a question asking people to rate on a 5-point scale their response to this statement. I treat all of my clients with respect for their culture, even though it may be different from my own. I believe that it is acceptable to speak a language other than English. and other types of questions that get people to think about and articulate their beliefs about different cultures and their own responses to it.
So individuals fill it out, and then it creates an opportunity for you to build a composite of where your team is with different aspects, attitudes, knowledge, awareness, beliefs, and then facilitate great dialogue, facilitate awareness building, cross-training, opportunities to bring in people who, resources. So in the National Service realm, we have the National Service Inclusion Project, where there are TA providers, information, so as you look at and create this composite of who we are as a team. I mean, we have this mission, we have this vision, we have this desire to be as inclusive and validating as possible, and now as I take in information and assess where we are beginning from, it's clear that across the board, we have some attitudes about persons for whom the first language is not English, or whatever it is, but you need to use something to make good decisions about training and dialogue, and so this would be another way to gather feedback and to create a profile so that you could grow the capacity. Any questions?
Yeah, and I think, Jen, since looks like we're bumping up against, or might have gone a little bit over our planned hour conversation, I think maybe what I'll do is just quickly show people the remaining slides, and then we can remain on the line and continue to chat as long as people want, or as long as folks have questions. We just want to be sensitive to folks who need to leave at this point. So if you do need to get going, feel free to disconnect, and we'll say thank you for joining us today and contributing to our conversation. But for those of you that have a few more minutes to spend with us, we invite you to stay on the line and stay logged into WebEx, and we'll keep going. Let me just point out quickly on slide 18 is a list of some organizations and their web links that provide some materials that may be helpful to your program. LEARNS is specific to national service, youth serving programs, but a lot of our materials are useful to programs working in any capacity or in any field. And then there are other organizations listed that promote the teaching of inclusion and tolerance, and we'd like to recommend them. And then finally, last slide, slide 19, is just our contact information here at LEARNS. Do feel free to give us a call or send us an email if there's anything that we can do to assist you. We're funded to be there to help. We're funded to be there to help programs, so do contact us if you have a question regarding this webinar or anything else that you're working on around the topic of inclusion and growing welcoming programs. And we have the pleasure of working with Jen. So if there's something that you have specifically for Jen, we're more than happy to pass it along, or if it's something that we might be able to help you with, or a resource we might be able to put you in touch with ourselves, we'll be happy to do that.
So we anticipated that some of you might have more extended questions. So if you do and we can help, we'd be happy to provide some technical assistance. So just let us know.
Great. Okay. So I think first of all, Jen, we should check in with, and please correct me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, Jui. She actually had a couple of comments. One I think that you touched on was creative examples for how mentoring programs can get feedback other than surveys and focus groups. And is that you?
Oh, yeah, yes, I got that answer, yes.
Okay, and sorry that
yeah.
pronouncing your name earlier.
No, you were right next time. Second time you were right.
Okay. I'm sorry, since you're on, you want to go ahead and maybe pose the last question you posted?
Kind of, it feels important to do cultural audits, but there are always like so many things going on at the program, and I can never make it a priority, even if I kind of understand, well, it should be done. So I was just like, okay, convince me a little bit more, just talk about it a little bit more so I could actually make it a priority, so the session would be more useful if I actually do it. So.
Yeah, what I have found is that sometimes, you put the message out there that you want everyone to care about this and to be more inclusive. I find that creating practice, just actually structuring activities so that people are going through deliberate, intentional motions to help build that, starts to change who owns that issue, how we go about it. So you may be using other strategies to gather feedback and to get people involved and concerned about it, but this is it doesn't take a whole lot of energy. Once it's done, it sort of has a life of its own. People grow into their understanding of what we're trying to do. So if you've never done it before, I mean, even if you did it with, a couple of your staff, did it internally the first time, just to see where does our thinking go after we've done something like that, and whether it'd be worth doing on a larger investment.
Okay.
And if you, wanted me to talk you through it, that would be fine later on. If you wanted to, what would it look like? How much time I need to spend on it? Okay.
Yeah, I'll give it a thought. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Yeah.
I wonder too, this is Nikki, if it might be as a way to make it seem less like an add-on or something burdensome, if it might be something you want to invite mentors and mentees to do as an activity. I don't know if you're a site-based program or what the logistics of that would look like, but it might give a fresh perspective and then also feel not so much like another thing on your list as a program coordinator. I don't know how that would play out, but just a thought.
It could also be done as, having someone do it as a special project. If you could.
Okay.
Yeah. So they provide the leadership for it.
Okay.
Other questions or comments? Phones are open, so you can just ask it verbally, or you can raise your hand or type something into the chat panel. You might need to unmute your own phone if you muted it earlier. So press mute or mic or *6. Okay, we're not seeing or hearing any questions or comments. Any closing words of advice you'd like to offer, Jen? Or
no, just thank you, and just usually we are talking to the choir, and just keep on doing what you're doing. And if you want to share some of the strategies that have worked for you, send it, put it into the evaluation, and we'll make sure that we also add that and circulate that information. So we didn't want it to be a one-way conversation, so help us stretch the webinar to be a community conversation. So we had some suggestions for you, but we'd really welcome any suggestions that you have for the rest of the community.
Great, and looks like Kathy had a question. I don't know if she's on the line. Maybe she can expand on this if she feels it's needed. But she typed, my board believes they are non-prejudicial, but they are. How can I address this?
Well, Kathy, what do you think about trying an audit activity to, instead of putting people on the hot seat, we might be able indirectly to inform their awareness. So having them be the advocates of a process that would give us some accurate feedback might actually help people make some shifts.
I'm going to try, but I can't even get them to help me with a strategic plan. So I want to be a little bit more gentle with it than that.
Okay.
I add something to that?
Yeah.
This is Kathleen. I wonder if this could actually be a small step toward a strategic plan. Can feel so ominous and overwhelming to some, but this, I think, could be one step that could then help potentially lead to larger interest in developing a bigger plan, maybe.
Yeah, I think that audit, especially if it was like 5 questions instead of like 12, we might be able to get some feedback on that. So.
And Kathy, you might assign, 2 questions to a pair of a team. And so break it down so not everyone has to look at the 12 questions. They are focusing on 2 of the 12.
Good idea. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Okay, any other questions or comments? And if you think of one after the webinar is over, do feel free to send us an email or give us a call to ask it, and we'll do what we can to answer it for you, or put in your hands the materials that would help you. Okay. Well, I think in that case we'll officially wind down. Thanks again to you, Jen, for sharing with us your knowledge and experience, and thanks to each and every one of you on the phone and in WebEx for making time to be with us. We hope it was helpful. As Jen mentioned, please do give us any feedback you might have on how we can do this better in the evaluation that should appear shortly. And thank you for doing the good work that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Jen,
Yeah.
do you have a couple moments?
Yes.
Okay. Can we call you back in a couple minutes?